This is Leafs Morning Take with Nick Alberga and Jay Rosehill.
Now we've got a fight started here right off the bat with Rosehill.
30 minutes of live, nonstop Leafs talk starts now.
What is good, my friends? Happy Friday, presented by Botano. It's the Friday edition of Leafs Morning Take. No Jay Rosehill today. He's away with family for the long weekend. So with that in mind, I've summoned a very special co-host for today's show. It's Nick Alberga and former NHL netminder Carter Hutton. Carter, can I call you Maple Leafs legend? Like, technically you were a Leaf, no?
I was for a quick cup of coffee, I guess. I got to join up with them last year a little bit, and obviously I'm excited to be here, Nick.
What was that experience like being a Bud? I know you're a Thunder Bay native.
Yeah, it was a bit of a whirlwind. So I married into like the Leaf faithful too. My wife, her father, her brothers are just diehard Leafs fans. So, getting moved to the Leafs there from Arizona. At first I didn't go. It was kind of, I stayed in Arizona. Then finally, I think when Mrazek hurt his groin, Dubas kind of gave me the call and said, okay, you got to get up here. And I got up there and started working on getting back ready to play. And it was pretty cool to be around there, right? The Mecca of hockey and just growing up in Thunder Bay, Ontario. Obviously, the Leafs is the place to be. So it was a really cool experience and getting to see how they run the organization.
Well, it's great to have you because often on this show, I've been calling for a goaltending summit, perhaps as soon as this summer, because every fucking goalie gets hurt every given night. And the Leafs are no different than any other team in this league. But we have to start with last night. I stayed up to watch the entirety of this game. I felt like I was on the couch. There's like an ass groove on that couch now, but 7 periods. I'd love to get that perspective from a goalie in this league.
Yeah, that is a tough position to be playing in. It's different when you're a player and you can jump the boards, get a little shift in and get back off and get some rest, where as a goalie, you got to be on because you don't know when it's coming, right? And majority of the work we do is like the pre-shot stuff, right? Like, so maybe, they got up obviously a ton of shots, but the mental fortitude to stay in a game like that is something else. But you have two goalies that are kind of two different styles of play too, where Freddie's a bigger guy, a little more methodical, manages the crease a little bit different than Sergei. Where Bob is, he works hard, and there's already been a lot of notes about how much weight Bob loses in a game. So you got to think, how is that going to be coming down now into the next games, the effect of it? But it's definitely a lot of wear and tear playing that many minutes.
I think from a Leafs perspective, Hutz, it was so tough to watch that game. On one end, you have Sergei Bobrovsky, who was outstanding in round 2 and obviously led to Toronto's demise. On the other, you have contract year Frederik Andersen, always injured, but it's so funny how he seems to be here at the right time in the moment for his contract. And I thought he was really good last night as well. But, what was the longest game that you played in your career? Do you recall like a game that went that long? Because again, watching that game, I didn't feel so much for the players. I felt for the goalies. Like, that's stressful moments in a hockey game.
Yeah, it was. For me, the longest was just the normal overtime. In the majority of the time in the playoff, I was just making sure that the door was open and cheering the boys on. But we had one that went to triple overtime in Nashville against San Jose, which was crazy. And it was one of those late starts because of the time zone. So by the time puck drop hit, it was 8:30. Game went to like past 2 a.m. And I remember coming out for the first overtime and everybody was just hammered. And then by second overtime, it like quieted down. And by third, everybody rallied again and everybody was just giving her again in Nashville. And what a scene. And Mike Fisher scored the winner in triple overtime. And I remember just the jubilation. They had the view of the bench, everybody hopping over the boards and guys falling every which way. So it was obviously a good memory.
The best part about that Matthew Tkachuk goal last night is how quickly he went to the room, presumably to get a shake in him or some pizza or some food, man. Like, these guys were so gassed. Like, half the team was in the dressing room when he scored. The other half was just like sitting there waiting, because we always have to do that in this day and age. As you see it on your screen now, we have to wait to make sure there's no offside or goalie interference. There's like so many things that have to go on before we know it's a conclusive goal, eh?
I know, and he's just pointing to the door, right? You can see that celebration. Hey, I know a few guys in the American League have done that one in Manitoba Moose there, where they score and they just go straight out the door in the shootout or OT, and I guess get the boys in there, get in the cold tubs and start recovering. But what a finish.
Dude, look how they had to pick up Bob there. It reminded me, to your point, it reminded me of Derek Fisher. Ooh, is that a shawarma commercial?
Showing us there.
I don't know. We're not sponsored, so fuck them. Derek Fisher reminded me of Derek Fisher years back. The Lakers in San Antonio hit a winning shot and then like bolted to the room because we didn't know if it went off in time. But what a win for the Florida Panthers. What a magical run that team is on, and we'll talk about them more coming up. Just want to alert all to subscribe, tap that like button, leave us a review wherever you're checking us out, at the Leafs Nation 401 on YouTube, at the Leafs Nation 401 on YouTube. By the way, Carter, where can people find you on Instagram? I know you're not on Twitter right now.
Instagram under Huts40 is my handle, so you can check me out there, and I'll start as I dive in a little more to this. Hopefully, start to put some more stuff up.
It's great to have you on, my man. At the Leafs Nation 401, where you can subscribe on YouTube. Additionally, we're available wherever you can find your podcast. Just search Leafs Morning Take. You'll find us. And don't forget to visit theleafsnation.com for the very latest on all things Toronto Maple Leafs. Thoughts, comments, questions, or concerns, drop us a line in the chat down below here on YouTube. We'll get to them a bit later on in the show. But for now, let's get over the boards. Yes, our amazing graphic, and aptly named Hutton's Hunch. I love alliteration, by the way, but I wanted to get the outsider's perspective on everything that's transpired, and I like the fact that you have the tie-in with the Maple Leafs. You had a cup of tea with them. Your family's pretty much grown into it. What was your perspective of another disappointing and crippling postseason exit?
It's tough the way that it went, in the sense of, you get over that hurdle of the first round, right? There's almost like this jubilation, and then to come out and lay an egg, it was almost like the first round hangover. It's like they had already won their playoffs, which is disappointing to me because, you thought this was their time to break through. And you look at a lot of different factors that are involved in it. Obviously, losing Samsonov doesn't help. I don't think Woll was a problem. I Woll played great as well. But you get in there and a lot of guys underperforming where, obviously the deal, like you have Tavares making the big money. And he comes through in the first round, scores the overtime winner. He gets them through. And just to be non-existent, scoring 2 goals max each game against Florida. And even when you start to dissect it more, in my opinion, you look back at that first round against Tampa when they did win. A lot of those games they were outplayed in. And they had a late minute comeback there, the one that OReilly scored the goal in the last minute, and they end up winning in overtime. And, once you get to overtime, it's a bit of a crapshoot. And even when you go back to, the other one where Riley tied it late with maybe 3 or 4 minutes left in the period, so those games could go the other way very simply. And maybe we're not even talking about the second round. So it wasn't just like a cakewalk through the first round. So to come out and play this Florida team that is obviously very deep, and watching the way the game was played, I was at Game 5 in Toronto, and they just grind. There's a lot of perimeter play, and they keep teams to the outside, where I found watching the Leafs, it would be like you'd hold puck possession, and then all of a sudden you come down and you're giving up a high quality chance, where I didn't see that as much on the other side of the ice. And you have those game breaker players where you talk about like Nick Cousins and Sam Bennett and these guys that are just sandpaper, and you get to this time of year and that's what you need. And I think it kind of really pushed them over the top.
It's funny, watching that game last night felt like I, saw the Spider-Man, meme, like Spider-Man looking at each other, the whole meme we know on social media, because it felt like two teams just know their identity right now. Like, I think that's such an astute point that I think you look at it from the Florida perspective, there's so much belief, there's so much buy-in. And then conversely, you look at that Leafs team, it's just a different story where at times in bits and pieces, even in the Tampa series, the Florida series specifically, they looked lost. Where I think identity is big in this time of year, consistency is big, and every night it seems like the Florida Panthers, the Carolina Hurricanes, you know what you're going to get from those two teams, right?
Yeah, it is, and it's kind of that relentless mentality, right? You think Carolina, they've kind of set the tone now for a few years, and you look at Carolina now without, they're missing, some of their best players, some of their best offensive players, and they haven't missed a beat because it all falls back into that structure, and Brind'Amour has drilled that into them. They know how to play. They're playing on the defensive side of the puck first, and it's hard to score against them. They make it hard to score against you no matter who's in the lineup, and it gets to a point where last night, they get a power play goal, right? They get that power play, and that is what kind of changes the game, where it seems like hockey is going in that thing. It's so well coached now, and there's really no hiding identity. When you go to play a team, everything is totally dissected. We watch so much video. Like, literally, we would watch a power play or anything. Even as a goalie, I know where every guy is almost going to shoot from in that sense, right? So it's you have the structure. Now it's a matter of, can we as a team play and make the chances as little as possible and win the game on the special team side of it.
And again, the margin for error is razor thin. Like, I have a problem with people looking back at the Florida series, and it's still out there on social media. Oh, the fucking reffing, like they should have had a call here and a call there. It's like, no, Toronto's power play was 2 for 11. Every year does the same thing. Hell, I said this going into the Carolina and Florida series, how vital that power play will be for both sides, namely Carolina. They got a couple, I believe, last night. I know they lost that game, but it sets a tone for a series. And I think from the Maple Leafs perspective, you don't have to look far to figure out why they lost that series. It was determination, it was consistency, it was stability. Like they just didn't play their game enough. And again, to your point, like this is not a thing that crept up on them. Like I would say ever since the trade deadline, and people gave me shit on social media for asking, did they make too many moves at the deadline? Well, I mean, it is what it is, but that team did not play well for a good chunk of the last, 25 to 30 games of the season.
No, and I feel like this is always a topic we circle back to every year in the playoffs. It's
Yeah,
like, what team is playing playoff hockey before the playoff starts? It's trying to catch a moving train.
true.
Like if you're not accustomed to being in that grind, and you look at Florida, who a real Cinderella run in the sense of if Pittsburgh beats Chicago, Florida's not even in the playoffs, right? In the last game of the year, where now they've been grinding, and you look back on that game where they're playing Toronto and Paul Maurice has his absolute snap show on the bench when they're playing like crap. They come back and win that game. Monty gets a winner in overtime, and it propelled them into that. And then you have another story where you have Alex Lyon, who is Bobrovsky. If Florida doesn't make the playoffs, we're sitting here talking about how Bobrovsky's overpaid, how it's BS, he's got a
Yeah.
bad contract. And then he's a Russian, he's just got his money, he doesn't care. And now we're talking about Bobrovsky winning the Conn Smythe Trophy. So it just shows you how fragile it is and the parity in the league, but you have to find a way to get in. And once you're in, anything can happen.
Yeah, the narrative certainly flips like really, really quickly too. Like I know a lot of people are referencing the Matthew Tkachuk trade and what the Leafs should do moving forward. But again, let's not forget how precarious their position was to begin with to get into the postseason, how close they were to being eliminated by Boston. And suddenly the narrative would change tenfold in that situation. But since we have you, we have to navigate through the crease and talk about what could be next for this Maple Leafs franchise. As you alluded to, Joseph Woll was a great story. I love how he had to go back to the American Hockey League to play one playoff game and he was lit up, but so be it. I think that was the biggest positive I can grab outside of Matthew Nyes this season was the emergence of Joseph Woll, because I could not remember the last time they had a homegrown talent in between the pipes. It's going to be turbulent, don't get me wrong, and you're the goalie, played in this league. There's going to be ups, there's going to be downs, but I think they have something in this kid right now.
I do too. Even his approach to the game, getting to know him a little bit last year, he was out when I was there. So we spent a lot of time, getting ready, and he was coming back from shoulder surgery. Just to, see him mature beyond his years and watching his approach, even going into that first start in Florida, they talk about his meditation and his, that stuff that like for me, I was a lot more, just aggressive, right? If I had a big game, I was so pumped up, and it took years of experience to get to where I think he is now. And it's like anything, these kids that are younger now are learning the right things earlier, right? And they're making adaptation, and their whole life becomes, the game and how to, speed up that curve. And he looks like a guy to me that's ready, you always want to talk about picks and how high he is or where he is, but I think the game does the talking. And when I watch him play, he looks like he's ready to go.
What can the ceiling be? Like, I think we always have to be careful when talking about young goalies. Like, there's so many perfect examples of that where there's going to be ups, there's going to be downs. Like, Jake Onger was turbulent at bits and pieces. He's found his game. I even like to look back at like a Connor Hellebuck. It took him a while to get his footing in this league. You look at Spencer Knight right now dealing with some stuff with the Florida Panthers. But what do you think ultimately the ceiling could be for like a Joseph Woll?
I definitely think he can be like your guy. I don't know if he's ever going to be, the Vasilevsky type. Those guys are, him and like, Carey Price and these guys that don't come around very often. But I definitely think he can be a high quality guy for them. And he's still very young, and as long as he can be durable, right? But I also think there's this process now of like, how do you protect him, right? I don't think you want him to be the guy outright next year, in the sense of, maybe it's a 1A, 1B, something you can kind of let him grow into the position. Because what I find is when you get these younger guys that are transitioning from the prospect into the, the NHL, being the guy in the spotlight all year for the Leafs is going to add in a lot of different pressure that he's not totally used to. And I think he's going to have this playoffs to draw back on. But at the same time, if it starts going south, there's really nowhere to run and hide anymore.
There is not. That is for sure. But I think we're all looking forward to seeing what Joseph Woll can do. And I think, again, it's unique to get your perspective. I'd love to know what happens behind the scenes, like in the tandem era. Like things are so different than they were. And I always like to bring this up. It was a different era. Like I'm 33. Back in the mid 90s, late 90s, it was, Marty Brodeur starting 75 times a year. I know you're buddies with Jamie McLennan, who had a great career backing up. And he had a great career of it. Like he was good and steady when called upon. And he made it that way. But I think the game and the position has changed so much where it's like you almost have to resort to a tandem because you have to keep your guys fresh for when it matters most in the postseason, right?
Yeah, it's the truth. And I went through that even during my free agency when after my year in St. Louis, I had a big year and I go to free agency and now I'm negotiating with all these teams and I'm trying to figure out, what's the best fit for me. I ended up going to Buffalo because I wanted a chance to be the guy. I wanted to throw my hat in the ring. And Boston was one of the teams that was all over me. They ended up going with Yaroslav Halak. And I didn't want to go to Boston in the sense because I knew I was always going to play, no matter how good I played or it went, knew Rask was going to be the guy. But their ultimate goal was to get another goalie that could play 40 games because they knew they had Tuukka Rask and they knew they could have him rested and ready to go if they had a high-quality guy. And now you look at the same situation in Florida where Bob gets that extra rest headed down the stretch because, obviously it didn't work out the way they played. They didn't plan for that, but Lyon gets the lion's share of the games down the stretch. And now you got arrested Bobrovsky and, the Panthers are seven wins away from winning the cup. So that tandem is important, especially with the wear and tear and the way that we play now. When I first came in the league, the chances were, on a busy night, you had maybe 12 scoring chances against. Now, sometimes you're seeing 12 chances a period. So it's the wear and tear on our bodies and the way we play is a lot different. So that load management per se becomes a lot more important.
It's funny. I vividly remember contract year Carter Hutton, dude. You were outstanding that year. And I remember free agency. I'm like, where's this guy going? And I think I pinpointed it when you called Buffalo. I'm like, oh shit, that's a decision and a half. But I mean, if you hit it in Buffalo, you're getting a statue there. But like, I understood why you chose Buffalo just because you want that opportunity. And I think as a goalie around the league, you look and like a lot of jobs are spoken for right off the bat.
Yeah, it's tough. And it's kind of that musical chairs, right? Where there's only so many seats at the table, right? So you have to be calculated, you have to be smart because next thing you know, if you're bouncing around two teams and they end up getting their number two guy, and by the time you circle back and that job's gone, next thing you know, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. So it was a good problem to have in that sense, but a lot went into it. And I think sitting here now, retired, done from the game, I don't regret it by any means. I wanted to give myself a chance to be the guy. I wanted to see where I could go with it. It obviously didn't work out in Buffalo, and it wasn't necessarily just all me. There's a lot of different factors that went in there, and the plan was to be the guy for a year and help develop Linus Allmark. And Linus, to this day, me and him have a great relationship, and I hope. I know that he's told me many times I've helped him, but he's a hell of a goalie, and just getting to be around him and to see the way he carries himself, but also giving him a little bit of my old school ways, I think has helped him out.
Just fingers crossed for that Sabres organization. I know we're a Leaf show, but they got UPL, they got Devin Levi. Don't fuck it up, please, for the life of us. I want to see Buffalo. I want to see them back in the Stanley Cup playoffs. You got to give me the 4-on-1 on Matt Murray. Like, I'll be honest, I've been tough on this guy since his days in Pittsburgh. He won back-to-back cups, but it's been such a treacherous road since. Like, what's the scuttlebutt behind the scenes within the goalie fraternity? Do you guys talk about stuff like that? Because it's just unfortunate. The guy's always hurt, but there are athletes like that, right?
Yeah, it's been a tough go for him. Like so Matt's a Thunder Bay boy as well, and I spent a lot of summers training with him, and he had that quick streamline right to the NHL. Right, things happen fast for him, and he ended up on a team that's a dynasty, and he played really well. But there was times where he was protected too, right? Where if he was giving up 4, Pittsburgh was scoring 5, or whatever the tally was, and the injury bug sets in, it gets tricky, right? Especially when you start dealing with like ankles and stuff, especially the way we play. We use so much leverage on our ankles. And now obviously the concussion is another thing that is, where does it go from here? But this was the trade that for me, you look back on it now and you knew the risk. It wasn't like a hidden thing. They moved in, and that's where you go back to Kyle, who is, obviously a great GM, but that loyalty, right? He has those ties to guys, and sometimes maybe is it blinding to him? And I hope Murray can make the comeback and be healthy, but it's a hard road. Like I dealt with a bad ankle injury and it gets tricky, but especially now, like you don't get any younger. These goalies are younger and younger and better. So he's on the other side of it now for sure.
I genuinely feel bad for him, and I just hope he can find his game again and it doesn't lead to a scenario where he's retiring early. Still has 1 year left on his deal. I'm very curious to see what the Leafs do with Matt Murray, because I think it makes the most sense to come back with a Wall and Samsonov tandem, but I don't think it's a foregone conclusion, by the way, that Ilya Samsonov is back. Like, I think he's got he's in a position where he should command a pretty decent, AAV, right around 4 or 5 million, I would say.
Yeah, this is the deal that scares me just because of like
Yeah,
Samsonov's past, where they did everything in their power here in Washington to give him the job. They wanted him to be the guy, and it
yeah.
was, he was getting in trouble. He was, granted he's older, more mature now, and maybe there's a factor, but then there is that scary factor for me of like, if we give him this deal, he was on a show me deal this year. I love this deal at the start of this year. I said it to numerous people. I'm like, I love him on the 1 year deal because he's got to perform, right? There's pressure on him. And then you add in the old Russian factor, right? You give them their ticket and they shut the mill. So like, is
True.
that a fear? Is that something like that maybe happens? I don't know. Like, but with the pressure of Toronto and all this, he's played really, really well. And it's going to be hard to just let him walk with the factor of like, you have Matt, who's on a big deal. I don't know what you do with that contract now, and Wool being ready to go.
Yeah, you talk about pina coladas. You give Matt Murray one of those, set you off to Robida Island, and we'll see you in a year, or we're going to place you on LTIR. That's probably the decision at hand, but some difficult decisions. I think you're so right on Samsonov. I think that could be the under the radar biggest, decision of the offseason for the Toronto Maple Leafs, because there is risk. I'm with you. Like, he had a good year, does get hurt quite a bit. A lot of goalies do, but you got to be right with that AAV, specifically when you're about to pay Matthews, maybe Nylander, Marner's in there, Tavares is in there. So we don't know who the GM is right now, which I think is hilarious. Not really hilarious, but kind of different than the norm in this league. Kyle Dubas, to the best of our knowledge, taking his time to decide what he wants to. We haven't heard from Brendan Shanahan. This team got ousted a week ago. Assuming, everything stays status quo, do you think this team should run it back? I know there's been a lot of conversation the last couple of days about, doubling up, looking at the core four, making some trades here. Would you just come back with the same roster or the same identity, if you will?
I truthfully don't know how you can. It's going to
Agreed.
be tough, but who is the piece that moves, right? Like, I think a good example would be like, you obviously look at the Panthers moving Huberdeau, right? He set a record season. It's unbelievable. Nobody saw that coming, but like, is there a better time to get rid of a guy than, his value being the highest? But who is that piece? And looking at this team and the NHL in general, the more you realize the regular season really is just about getting in. It's not about dominating the regular season. You could talk about how the Leafs only lost 2 games in a row, I think 3 times during the regular season, and all these different
Exactly.
factors. But like, at the end of the day, that doesn't matter because it's all about the playoffs. And year after year after year after year now, you look at this and it's been the same result. So I don't understand how you could possibly not make that move. And I think Dubas's interview, hearing him talk, it's almost like he knows it too. Where in years past, it almost sounded like he had that blind trust of like, this is the core, and we're going to do it with this core. And now his reaction is, I think he knows that he can't. And whether he's taking that step back to figure out with his family or what he's going to do, where does it go from here? I don't know. And which piece do you move? Like, Nylander's always a guy that leaves you wanting more. Like, he's so good, but then sometimes so bad on the other side of the puck. And Marner's a guy that, players like Mitch Marner don't come around very often. And obviously Matthews is who he is. And I think obviously the contract Tavares making $11 million is still the one that stings, but he's still putting up 35 goals a regular season. And there's a lot of moving parts that are involved, but I don't know how you go back to the well again.
I'm right there with you. I think it would be the definition of insanity, considering we've seen this rodeo for like 5-6 years now. We've given this team so many chances and they can't push through. And I think in some respects, it's fair to draw correlations to the Florida Panthers. Again, a lot has to go right for your team, but I do think they're a team that looked at their roster, said, hey, we won the President's Trophy, but it wasn't good enough. We got to alter the DNA, the identity of this team. They went ahead and did it. It took them a while to get going. They changed their head coach, going away, from a guy like Andrew Brunette, who had a great second half to last year. And look how it turned out. Ultimately, again, things have to go in your favor and all that, but I think you have to take that leap of faith sometimes. I think that's the concern within Leafs Nation right now is, say you make that, franchise-altering trade, whatever you want to call it, and it doesn't work out, what's next? I think you have to make one of these deals, but be prepared for what could come with it, right? I.e., you trade Marner, he rips it up, goes far in the Stanley Cup playoffs. You have to be prepared. There's an element of risk and gamble to life, no?
Yeah, for sure. Right. And obviously the Panthers are the exact the one you want to look at. But there's been other ones where you've moved a guy and it's gone south too, right? So
Yeah.
there is that risk. But again, is the risk higher running it back again with the same result, with the same, and then maybe it doesn't go well and Matthews is gone, or who know,
Yeah.
and then you're losing him for nothing. So it's one of those things that there is a lot of risk involved, and it's definitely going to be interesting. But they definitely have a good team, but I just don't know if they have the back end that you see winning teams with, right? You look at you look at Vegas, you look at Dallas, you look at Carolina, they're back. Even the way that like Mark Stahl has found the fountain of youth in Florida. And is it Mark Stahl, or is it the way that they play? Is it the structure of their game versus the way that the Leafs play, where you have this freewheeling offense that doesn't help benefit, the back end? So there's definitely a lot to take in, and I don't know the right move, and I don't think anybody knows the right move at this point. The right move will tell us next year when it's this time of year again.
Consensus seems to be the structure, the game plan. Like you look at Florida specifically, how wide open they were last year, I should say. Paul Maurice comes in, different story. So you start to wonder what that means for Sheldon Keefe. Anyway, the Botano Wrap Up is presented by Botano.ca. The game starts now, 19 plus. Please play responsibly. And I'm on a bit of a heater here, Huts. I've won 2 in a row. My play for today, I'm going to take the Dallas Stars money line on the road in Vegas, game 1 of the Western Conference Final, plus 110. I think it's been all about the roadside here in the postseason. In general, I like Dallas to win this series, and I like Ottinger over Adin Hill. What do you make of that goaltending matchup? What do you make of this series?
I don't mind this pick at all. Vegas are definitely homers in the sense of, that's a tough rink to go into and play, but I think Dallas has that maturity and playoff sense, and I just see maybe a little bit of the Adin Hill hangover too. He just won a humongous game, the biggest game of his career, and now he's got to come out and try to go to the well again, where this Ottinger is, when he's on, he's on. So I'll definitely back you on that one.
I like it. And that to me is the big story of the Western Conference Final. If Jake Ottinger finds his game, I think it's curtains for your boy Jack Eichel and the Buffalo Sabres. I just think Dallas has a bit more depth. Tyler Seguin's playing like a man possessed. If they can never get Robertson going too, he's got 2 goals in 13 games, both on the power play. But I'm really, really looking forward to the Western Conference Final. And I would say the East Final has lived with expectations so far as well. 7 periods, including 4 periods of free hockey, as we love to call it. Just a crazy, crazy game. You can only wonder what's in store for game 2 of that series. As we shift on over to the chat, people saying what up to Carter Hutton, special co-host for today's show. It's great to see the support of the chat here. Hit the like button, says Tim. Any gems in the draft for a defenseman? I really don't know that, to be honest. We'll have somebody who covers the draft on the next couple weeks. Super Strict 9, Wall definitely has full-time starter potential. He's 24. And that's a good point to make too, right? I think the comparisons I was trying to draw to guys like Knight and even Carter Hart, like these are younger guys who are coming in the league at 20 or 21. I think it's easy to forget Joseph Wall's in his mid-20s, right?
Yeah, it's a big advantage. I even look at myself, like I didn't leave university until I was 24. I went to 2024. I was a late bloomer in that sense, but that extra maturity, and I remember so many goalies as I was coming up that would come out of major junior and they were 20 and they would just get eaten up. It's hard, right?
Yeah.
Even you look at like like UPL you talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And his struggles, he's still so young. They're already so quick to want to ship him out. Like he's not even close to being ready. And you think, I didn't really make it till I was 26, 27 full time in the NHL. And I got to play for, almost a decade in the NHL, where imagine I got thrown in when I was 20. I might not be sitting here today with the same career that I had. So there is a maturity factor, and you don't want to burn it up, but he's one of those goalies that looks like he's ready to make the step here.
Kelly writes in, let Dubas walk, and a lot of people going back and forth. I think that's my curiosity, man. I've been saying this all week. Where in the world is Brendan Shanahan, man? Like, I want to hear from the guy, dude. It's been a week and just nothing.
I know. It's very interesting to see him, crickets on that front. And I know Dubas takes a lot of heat, but I don't know where you go. Where do you upgrade from that? Where does it go from that? He kind of moved, and he made a bunch of stuff to help this team and give them what they need, and it still didn't happen. So I think I look more to the bench boss than I do the GM at this point.
And selfishly, I'm one of the biggest fact daddy guys you'll find, and Rosie loves him too. We love Ryan O'Reilly on this show, man. I was so pumped to see him in the blue and white. Maybe didn't go to belief and expectation. I don't think he was fully 100%. Obviously, had the foot, the finger injury. Who knows what he was playing with? But I would love a perfect scenario where they're able to bring Ryan O'Reilly back. I think it's going to be tough. But him and Luke Shen, I'd love to see those guys back.
Yeah, two quality people too, right? And just dressing room guys, guys that have the
Yeah.
maturity and to understand this market, understand the pressure. So say if next year there was a little bit of a lull during the regular season to be like, doesn't matter, boys, and you know, keep the ship going straight. And those are guys that don't come around very often either.
Huts, phenomenal job today. Once again, to subscribe to this beautiful podcast at the Leafs Nation 401 on YouTube, at the Leafs Nation 401 on YouTube. Hammer that like button, give us a share. Anything to help that algorithm. Again, we're available wherever you find your podcasts. And again, Huts, why don't you share that Instagram of yours?
It's at Huts40, so you can check me out and hopefully to dabble a little more into my insight here with you, buddy. It was great having me on here.
Holy fuck. Let's get this guy back on Twitter here. What are we doing here, Huts?
Yeah, we'll get on it. I was trying to protect myself a little bit there. It wasn't a great place to be when you're playing for the Buffalo Sabres and you're starting a lot of games that aren't going well.
Yeah, I hear you. And I was probably one of those people digging on you. I'll be honest. Let's dig up some old tweets. But Huts' hot takes, I think, coming soon to this channel. But Carter, great stuff. Have a great long weekend, buddy.
Okay, thanks, Nick. I appreciate it.
There you have it, the one and only Carter Hutton. Many thanks to everybody in the chat. Of course, to my co-host Jay Rosehill and producer Alex. Bang up job as per usual. So again, a programming note, we're not with you on Monday, back on Tuesday. I'm going to get in the mix with a couple drinks this week and be back hot and heavy on Tuesday. Let's not hope for a news dump. That's exactly what's going to happen. 5 Eastern time, the Leafs are going to announce something and I'm going to be fucking pooched. But that's what happens. I'm Nick Alberga. Take care.